Serpent Nebula, Citadel, Private Council Chambers. Despite the opinions of a certain human spectre and millions of extranet denizens, the Council did not spend all day doing nothing. There were hundreds of policies that had to be carefully considered, thousands of new requests for each species in Citadel space, and millions of summaries to read about incidents all over the galaxy. Trying to keep on top of it all was a full-time job, and unsubstantiated rumors simply couldn't be placed above the very real issues the 4 members of the Council faced every day. Which is why it was incredibly frustrating when not only did that particular spectre not only provide proof that the collectors were indeed behind the abducted human colonies and were using them for something, but another much more real and immediate problem failed to have the decency to resolve itself despite going through the single most deadly relay ever discovered. Which meant it was still their problem. Are you absolutely sure that no information about this Revan exists? Councillor Spirators questioned their Solarian counterpart. Surely the STG teams you no doubt had investigate have found something? If Falern was insulted at the insinuation he would hide information, he did not show it. Nothing. There are no records, sightings, or even rumors of her before she appeared on Commander Shepard's ship. That can't be possible. Someone with her abilities can't have just come from nowhere. Of course not. But her background has been carefully covered up. The Solarian countered. We will need more time to uncover it. Be sure to keep us updated. So far what little we know about this figure is that she is an incredibly dangerous warlord at least. Now that she has supposedly taken charge of both the Geth and Quarians, we need to make sure that another conflict does not break out. We may need to consider denouncing anyone affiliated with the migrant fleet until we can be certain this woman will not cause a major incident. Is this really the best use of our time? Anderson broke in. We now have solid evidence that the collectors were working for the Reapers. We need to discuss. That is concerning, and we will give the topic all the attention it deserves, Tavos interrupted with the tone of a school teacher trying to get an unruly student to focus. But according to Shepard's report, the collectors have been dealt with for now. The more important matter is that this Revan character has come out of nowhere and installed herself as Empress of both the Geth and the migrant fleet. We cannot allow a complete unknown to cause chaos throughout the galaxy. We need to know what her goals are. She's doing what we should be doing, preparing for the Reapers. Anderson sighed in frustration. She's willing to believe Shepard about that and is taking it seriously. Without the ridiculous demands for proof this council seems to require, I could add. Ridiculous? We cannot act on the word of just one human. Spirators snapped. Shepard's has given us nothing. Except a translated Prothean warning, stopping Soren's override of this very station to receive something from deep space, aiding in the destruction of a Reaper at the cost of a human battle group, you mean? Anderson interrupted. Or rather the Geth super dreadnought. Though I guess that won't work anymore since the Geth and Quarians are joining forces to fight against those ships, so it can't come from the Geth. And that was just what she gave us 2 years ago. Now she's given us even more proof and we're just planning on ignoring it. I think a brief recess is in order. Tavos said diplomatically. None of us will be able to make any progress if our emotions are getting the better of us. We'll reconvene when Councillor Anderson has calmed down. A few months ago, Anderson might not have cared to notice the deliberate choice of words used by the Asari councillor. But after Revan had pointed out all the slights and insults the other, more experienced, politicians had used during the meeting with Shepard, he had been much more vigilant about such things. Blaming him for derailing the session by being over-emotional would just be the latest in a long line of excuses, and the old captain of the original Normandy found himself increasingly less inclined to deal with them. Not when time was running out. Maybe it was time to leave the desk to someone willing to play word games while the countdown to Armageddon ticked down and get back to the Alliance. There he could at least be doing something productive. Oh. Crescent Nebula, Tarsail System, Ilium. Sounds of panicked gunfire filled the night air as a trio of Asari in Eclipse armor stumbled around a corner, blindly firing at something behind them. There was a brief explosion and smoke began wafting out of the alley the three mercenaries had come from. "Did we get her?" the youngest of the three asked nervously. As if in response, a form shrouded in biotic energy exploded through the smoke and slammed into the mercenary, shattering what was left of her barrier and throwing her to the ground. The second merc was enveloped in another field before she could blink and was sent headfirst into the side of a building. The third had just enough time to try pointing her gun at the form when 3 gunshots rang out. The last Asari looked down at the trio of holes that had punched their way through her breastplate before wordlessly collapsing. "No, you didn't get me," the figure commented as the glow of biotics faded away, revealing another Asari wearing a predominantly blue hardsuit with a white corset-like section. While she wasn't nearly as famous as her human counterpart, Televosir was a well-known figure as a council spectre. It was actually a little insulting that 3 random mercs thought they could take her in a straight fight. Whatever, not her problem anymore. Vosir fired off a hacker program from her Omnitool and smiled when she saw the results. A full record of a red sand distribution line, just as promised. She activated another program and waited patiently as a secure line to her agent was established. "Spectre Vosir, I trust the information is satisfactory." "Yeah, they had everything I needed. Tell the Shadow Broker he does good work." Vosir didn't actually like the Shadow Broker. In fact, if she ever got a clear run at him, she'd be just as likely to kill him as ask for information, but without someone doing the legwork for finding out all the little schemes trying to throw the galaxy into chaos, Vosir wouldn't have the time to actually find or stop them. So that meant working with the Shadow Broker to weed out the worst of the worst, even if that meant paying back some favors from time to time. "The broker provides the best, Spectre," the agent replied with an edge in their voice. "Something you should already be aware of. Which is why the broker requires you to do something in return." Vosir sighed. "What does he want?" "There's a certain information broker on Ilium that's been sticking her nose into things best left alone. An Asari by the name of Liara Tsoni. The Shadow Broker wants her taken care of. Permanently." She never liked this part. The Shadow Broker was using her to knock off one of his rivals again. Or maybe he just didn't like this broker in particular. Oh well, one broker was a small price to pay for access to the Shadow Broker's information network. They tended to be horribly corrupt criminals anyway, so it was no real loss on her side either. "Fine, I'll take care of her. I'm afraid Spectre Vosir will be unavailable for a little while." A new voice interrupted. "Our order has need of her services." Vosir whipped around to face the unexpected new arrival, her Vindicator rifle snapping up only to freeze once she saw who it was. Not many could sneak up on a Spectre, especially not one that tended to work alone like she did, but an Asari Justicar was definitely one of the few Vosir would expect to be capable of such a feat. Although this one seemed a bit different than a normal Justicar. Vosir knew that all Justicars were the pinnacle of biotic strength, but most of them carried a weapon if only for having something to hand over as a symbolic gesture of committing no violence when dealing with others. The Spectre could only see a strange metal tube hanging from the other Asari's belt. I'll have to turn down the request after all." Vosir spoke over her agent quickly. Everyone knew a Justicar's code was absolute. The last thing she wanted was him saying the wrong thing and the Justicar deciding Vosir needed to die instead of working for her. "I'll make it up to the Shadow Broker later." A favor owed. Tella hated owing favors to anyone on principle. Owing one to someone like the Shadow Broker was even worse. But she preferred living. "Why you don't get her agent started before the Spectre ended the call?" "Sorry about that, ma'am. What can I assist you with?" she said respectfully. Every little Asari wanted to be a Justicar at one point, after all. And although Tella had learned a long time ago about what a poor idea it was to meet your heroes, it was impossible to stop some of that childhood admiration from rising up anyway. The other Asari gave her a small smile. "You don't have to be so tense, I won't bite. But yes, I need your help tracking down one of your fellow Spectres. The human, Jane Shepherd." Teller froze. A random information broker was one thing. Even a well-connected one if the benefits were worth it. But going after another spectre? That was another line entirely. One she wasn't prepared to cross without a very good reason. Thankfully the Justicar continued before she needed to say anything. There's a very dangerous, let's call her criminal, yes, a very dangerous criminal traveling with your fellow spectre that I need to eliminate. You will help me with this endeavor. So not Shepard herself. Teller was much less conflicted about helping this person then. If they had a Justicar after them, they certainly did something to deserve it. I'll put out an urgent request to meet. The last update I saw, Shepard was investigating something about the collectors and some crazy conspiracy about how they're just pawns for something else. I don't know if she's finished with that, but I can say I found a lead regarding a deal they had with some fringe groups. That should be enough to get her to investigate at the very least. Wonderful. I have the feeling I am going to enjoy working together, Miss Televosier. Oh. Horsehead Nebula, Pax System, Novaria. Gamvarel Vasshazal stood silently in front of his supervisor, privately glad his Enviro suit hid the wide smile on his face as he watched the fat, lazy Turian try and wrap his poor little brain around what he was just told. It wouldn't be proper to be grinning like this was the best day of his life while giving such grave and distressing news. I am sorry, what did you say? Gamvarel did his best to hide his amusement. Again, something much easier to do when faced with someone who never took the time to learn how to read Quarian body language. Even if that person was supposed to be his boss. Still, he just pushed that aside for now and put on an act of being sad and repentant. I said that the entire team just quit. Without them, there is no way the project is going to be finished by the deadline. Figuring out how everything works just based on what documentation was left behind alone will take months. Gam said sadly, though he wasn't lying. It really would take whatever engineers that took over months to familiarize themselves with the project, let alone complete it. The math and coding was just that complex. The price paid when dealing with cutting-edge Mass Effect technology. Quit? They can't quit. The supervisor sputtered. That's a breach of contract. I'll have those ungrateful suit rats slapped with a lawsuit so hard their heads will spin. About that. Our contract says that quitting for any reason will bar the Quarian in question from seeking employment anywhere else on Novaria without paying a fine, one so massive that Gam wasn't sure even one of the admirals could pay it off on their own, but they are free to quit whenever they want. Of course, a Quarian could be fired whenever someone wanted without warning, but that was neither here nor there. I don't give a damn. The Turian exploded. This project was going to land me a promotion. How dare they just walk out on me? After everything I did to help them too. Yes, the help. As if quarter pay to any other comparable engineer, long hours, unreasonable demands, and thinly veiled racism was somehow supposed to demand loyalty from a team that had only stayed because there was no guarantee of being hired somewhere else. Frankly, it was a wonder someone would ever give up a position on this lovely ice ball with perks like those. Damn it all, fine, at least you seem a little smarter than the rest of those rats. Gum, Gam whatever. The Turian waved him off. I don't care what it takes. You are going to meet that deadline, even if that means you don't leave that lab until it's done, do you hear me? I do, there's just one problem with that. Gamvarel replied. What? I quit too, I'm just here to hand in everyone's security badges. The Quarian smirked while placing the stack of said objects on the desk. I'd say it was a pleasure, but honestly, you can go fuck yourself. And with that, Gamvarel walked out of the office, the building, and didn't stop until he reached the lot where one of the few non-Quarian friends he had made was waiting in an air car. Better to be long gone before his ex-supervisor managed to reboot his sorry excuse for a brain. It was only after the two of them were in the air and on the way to the spaceport that Gam managed to fully relax. So that's it then? All of you are heading back to the fleet? His friend asked. Yes. I don't know what the big deal is, but the admirals have called everyone back for something big. Rumor has it they managed to get another lifeship built somehow. Gam lied. He felt bad for lying to his friend, especially because the Solarian had been nothing but helpful the entire time they knew each other, but the message from the fleet had been clear. No one was to say anything about their plans to return to Rannoch before it was too late to stop them. It had happened before, where a group of Quarians would announce their intention to start a colony on some backwater world only for some deeply regretful group to come out of nowhere with a bunch of legal Varan shit and a Turian patrol fleet saying they would either need to move on or be declared pirates. It was clear that there were some very powerful people determined to make sure the Quarians never had a home again. Gam didn't want to think what those people would do if they found out they were going home anyway. He might not trust the bulb heads much, but honestly he could say that about pretty much every other race in the galaxy too if you considered the Geth a proper race. He didn't think the galaxy was conspiring against him just because he was Quarian or anything like that. He had met just as many people willing to overlook the racist stereotypes as people willing to believe them, but he firmly believed that most simply didn't care enough to do anything meaningful about the struggles every Quarian faced day to day. He didn't hate them for it, though. He was guilty of the same thing after all. How many slaves were suffering under either pirates or Batarians? How many people were struggling with injuries or illness? How many were simply starving? How many others faced discrimination just because of stereotypes about their race? Gam Varel had no idea, and he wasn't particularly interested in finding out or doing anything about it. He didn't consider himself a bad person. He just felt those issues were too big for a normal engineer like himself. He'd leave dealing with those types of things to people like Talizora and the Empress. People that had the ability to tell reality this was how something was or would be, and for the rest of the world to just follow along. Gam Varel would just let them do their thing and do his best doing perfectly normal things. Wow, a new live ship? That would be incredible, his friend exclaimed, unaware of Gam's internal thoughts. That would explain why so many Quarians are going back to the fleet. It's going to be hard finding someone to talk to about engineering at this rate though. Everyone else I know is too focused on the theoretical side, no respect for those like us that just want to build things. Gam chuckled. Well, who knows what is actually going on, but I'd be happy to trade a few messages over the extranet. It'd be a shame to never hear from you again. The two of them traded small talk for a bit until they reached the spaceport. Gam had already sent the few possessions he had ahead with another of the Quarians leaving today, so there wasn't much for him to do besides board the shuttle. One final goodbye and he was off into the void, with nearly every Quarian either having already left or not far behind. At this point it was clear. Despite the difficulties and slights most Quarians dealt with to even get a legitimate job in the first place, they were all leaving. The Solarian watched as the shuttle shrank to a tiny dot in the sky and activated his Omnitool. STG Mission Log Null 1328 12412A, Final Log. Escorted last member of observed team to shuttle where subject departed planet from. No destination was extracted beyond back to the fleet. Further observation impossible. Ending mission and reporting back for reassignment. End log. Shepard breathed a sigh of relief as the Normandy slid into the dock with no additional issues. The trip back from the collector base had been more than a little nerve-wracking considering all the things that broke down on the way to Ilium. The entire crew had been helping Talai and Revan hold everything together, and the fabricators had almost melted themselves trying to print everything they needed for patch jobs. Shepard wasn't even kidding about holding the ship together. At one point Revan was literally using her powers to hold two cut cables together so they wouldn't lose life support while their engineers scrambled to weld supports for the coolant lines that had broken loose and severed them. The Normandy was going to need a long time in a full dry dock to get everything sorted, but it got them to Citadel space. And with a few things fixed up while the crew got some downtime on Ilium, they wouldn't need to worry about the ship falling apart around them at least. Well, the crew that was staying on at any rate. With the mission done and over with, Shepard was going to lose most of her specialists before she made her way back towards the Alliance. The non-humans simply didn't have a reason to go to that sector of space, and a few of the human ones had pretty good reasons to avoid it anyway. So that meant her team was likely going to disband here, but considering how many of them had already come to her to talk about preparations for the Reapers, Shepard felt like they were making actual steps towards preparation. Revan was already preparing to leave the ship so she could head to the Perseus Vale and deal with running her new empire. But that was future talk. Right now Shepard was going to grab Liara and drag her to a reunion with the other Normandy survivors from the first Collector attack. It was time that they had a celebration for finally getting some long-deserved payback. But when the commander saw a bunch of security officers outside Liara's apartment and the whole area taped off, she just knew that something was going to get in the way of that celebration and triggered her comm. "Hey, Garrus, Talai. Something's up at Liara's place. Mind giving me some backup?" "Sure thing, Shepard. Heading your way now," Garrus sent back. Now Shepard just hoped Liara was okay. "Oh." Revan looked up as Tali'Zorah and Garrus rushed to meet up with Shepard in full combat gear after their call. Curious, the Sith pulled on the Force in an attempt to tease out what was happening in the future, but all she got was vague impressions of a battle surrounded by lightning and danger directed at herself. Not particularly useful on its own due to her own tendency to use Force lightning in battle. Still, the knowledge that another battle was close made it worth it. Revan took a moment to collect her thoughts given the new information and how it would affect her immediate plans. All her belongings were being transferred to a secure holding area until they could be loaded onto the ship that was going to deliver her, Tali'Zorah, and Legion back to the migrant fleet and then onto Rannoch. But considering Tali'Zorah had just run off, Revan had to consider that the danger might be coming from two different sources and that they might end up separated for one reason or another. That wasn't too much of a concern. Shepard was trusted enough that Tali'Zorah staying behind would be seen as the young Quarian helping a friend and not as Revan trying to remove a political opponent or something. The Sith was under no delusions that despite the Quarians publicly accepting her as their empress, she had truly unified them, or that they followed her with no reservations at all. There were absolutely going to be pockets that demanded complete destruction of the Geth or resisted her leadership in other ways. Revan probably didn't have to worry about anyone competent trying to twist Tali'Zorah assisting her friend as a malicious act on Revan's part. It did unfortunately mean that Revan would have to handle the final registration of the ship they were going to use and the preparations to leave Ilium herself, because there was no way the port authorities would accept a Geth wandering around instead, and someone needed to keep watch over the relative treasure trove of things hidden away here. It was actually a little nostalgic and reminded Revan of all the times on the Ebon Hawk that despite being one of the most powerful, and at times infamous, people in her galaxy with some of the most skilled companions following her, she had to do much of the grunt work herself for one reason or another. "Legion, I'm heading out to take care of the ship details. Wait here. If anyone tries to steal our stuff, message me or Edie." They might not technically be part of the Normandy's crew anymore, but Revan was willing to bet the newly liberated droid mind of the ship wouldn't mind sending help to a fellow synthetic. Shepard wouldn't either, assuming she was available. "Understood, Revan Empress. We will wait here," the Geth replied simply. "Oh." A group of 5 Asari were huddled around a single screen, watching as a cloaked figure exited a transit station and walked out of frame. The screen swapped to another view as the figure continued on, unaware they were being watched. This repeated several times from several different angles until the 5 figured they could pick out the target in the middle of a crowd in seconds. The screen shut off and the 5 stood around waiting until a 6th Asari made her way into the room. The other 5 instantly stood straighter. An unconscious reaction to a Justicar honoring them with her presence. "I trust that everyone here has memorized what our enemy looks like?" the Justicar asked redundantly. As if any of them would slack off on an assignment like this. "Of course, Justicar," the apparent leader of the 5 said, stepping forward. But I have to ask, is this much effort really needed for just one human? My huntresses alone should be more than enough. The Justicar was already shaking her head. This enemy is not human. It is not Asari or Drell or anything like you would have encountered. It is Sith, an ancient enemy that comes from many races seeking to corrupt and subjugate whatever it can with dark and unnatural powers. I have no doubt that you and your huntresses are skilled, Naana, but this one can only be felled by one from my order. Then, what is my team supposed to do? Don't worry, I'm not about to use your team as bait for some monster. The Justicar said with a smile. The 5 of you, along with one other agent I will introduce you to soon, will ambush the Sith and lure it away from the general public following my directions. Once it is tired and disoriented, you will lead it to an arena my associate has prepared to prevent it from escaping, and I will kill it. Reassured her team wasn't about to be used as fodder for whatever creature the Justicar was hunting, the leader relaxed. And when will your associate be joining us? We will need to move soon if we don't want to lose your target. Oh, she just arrived. Why don't you come introduce yourself, Teller? If any of the huntresses doubted this was a serious matter for some reason, the sight of an annoyed spectre joining them put those thoughts to rest. You still need to tell me how you always seem to know when someone is nearby, Kayla. Teller Vossier said as she joined the group. Tech? Biotics? Whatever it is would be really useful for my own investigations. The Justicar, Kayla, simply smiled. It's a skill, but one available to only a chosen few. And not one I can teach. TCH, fine. It was worth a shot. The spectre scowled. We ready to move then? Your target just stopped for a bit. Yes. It's time for us to rid the galaxy of one of its greatest threats. Let us go, under the light of the goddess. Oh. Someone was following her. It wasn't a feeling Revan was unused to for several reasons, and most times she would have made note of it, judged the threat to herself, and then act or ignore the ones following her based on the result. And from what she could initially tell, they were not immediate threats. Normally she would keep her pursuer in the back of her mind and continue on, but she would be an utter fool to ignore a suspicious presence when she had predicted a conflict only earlier today. Revan reached for the Force and felt the same whispers of danger she had noticed earlier, but the lightning was missing. And now there was something else brushing against the edges of her future sight, an unknown she didn't have time to meditate on right now. Did that mean that she would be restricted from using her lightning somehow? Was the lightning specifically tied to Garrus and Talai for some reason? Had something changed? What could that unknown feeling be? Revan had no idea and was once again frustrated with the vagueness of future visions. For now, there was nothing she could do but wait and see. With that in mind, Revan continued with her task of getting ready to leave Ilium with very little to make note of. The padwork was completed, filed, and approved in short order, and no unexpected surprises. By the end of the day, Revan and everyone going back to the Quarians would be free to go on their way. And since the danger Revan sensed hadn't weakened at all, that meant her pursuers were planning on making their move before then. In fact, they were probably going to make a move soon. Another 2 watchers had joined the first while Revan was taking care of her errand, and now they had her roughly surrounded. She really doubted they would do that without some kind of goal in. The Force screamed as 3 slightly staggered shots rang out. Revan's lightsabers were out and ignited in a flash, and she managed to disintegrate 2 of them before they hit her, but she was surprised when the third didn't come from one of the 3 watchers but from the same street level she was on. A 4th agent. Revan staggered a bit as the round slammed into her back, but thanks to her personal shields and armor she was unharmed. Revan turned to face her closest assailant. A fully armored Asari stood there with a heavy pistol still pointed at the Sith. The gun barked 3 more times, but now that Revan was aware of her attacker, she easily blocked the shots and moved to capture the Asari. Someone had set this up specifically for her. She wanted to know who. But before she could get close, the last watcher fired a rocket at her while the 2 snipers continued to target her. Revan had to pause to not only deflect the gunshots but also so she could focus on redirecting the more explosive threat. A clawed hand reached out and the Sith Empress seized the rocket in a telepathic grip before throwing her arm to the side. Tiny motors on the body of the projectile tried and failed to redirect it back on its intended course as the rocket collided with a parked skycar nearby. Revan twirled her red saber once again to block a fifth sniper round and looked back towards her target. The armored Asari had long since fled while the streets exploded into chaos. Pedestrians panicked at the sudden gunfire and explosions, and most of them were doing their best to run away from Revan. Either because they realized she was the one being attacked or at the sight of her lightsabers Revan couldn't tell. Either way they were doing a wonderful job of hiding Revan's attacker among them. Or they should have been. Spotting a single Asari out of the hundreds fleeing should have been an impossible task. Even a novice assassin would have known to use the crowd to hide them as they ran or used the chaos to duck down an alley unseen. Yet there she was, clearly visible, waving her handgun around before ducking around a corner once she was sure Revan had seen her do so. These attackers couldn't have raised a bigger sign yelling "trap" if they rented one of the billboards and advertised it there. Unfortunately, if Revan wanted answers, she was going to have to spring it. Still, no reason to be reckless about it. Revan put a finger to her ear and activated her comm unit, having long adjusted the technology in her mask to be compatible with this universe's methods of communication, only to quickly discover everything was being blocked by a jamming signal. The only device she could call was the upgraded module she had built for Legion. The one she hadn't installed because his frame needed to be repaired or replaced on Rannoch, and she decided it would be easier to add it then. "Fine then," Revan muttered under her breath. "You want me by myself? Let's see how prepared you are for that." Oh. As Revan quickly found out, far more prepared than most people. Whoever was calling the shots for this ambush knew how to fight Force users. Revan had dismissed the snipers being specifically prepared for her because slug weaponry was so common compared to her own galaxy. No energy or particle weapons meant nothing to reflect and theoretically no way for Revan to touch them. But it was the traps they had set up along the assassin's path that tipped the Sith Empress off. Every single one of them, or indirect or area of effect attacks Revan could only dodge or block with a force barrier. Explosions, flamethrowers, sonic weaponry. All of it designed or hidden to be as hard for Revan to tell where the flashes of danger were coming from until the last moment. If she didn't know better, she would have assumed it was the work of a Mandalorian. The chase was almost over though. The Asari assassin had stopped running and was waiting for Revan to catch up just ahead. The three other assassins had also rejoined their teammate or were at least spread out in the vicinity. They even added 2 friends to their number, though one was oddly small in the Force. It was weird to describe. There was no one else in the area though. It seemed whatever this group was, they didn't want normal civilians around for the final confrontation. She briefly considered acting as if she was tired or injured during her pursuit but discarded the idea. On a personal level, she never really liked acting to be at a disadvantage, and on a more practical level this group wasn't likely to underestimate her on perceived injuries anyway, though there was a chance they might come full circle and think she was hiding any fatigue or injuries by acting unaffected by the various traps they laid out. Brushing that thought aside, Revan strode into the park that had been chosen as her ambusher's battleground. Lots of open space, long sightlines for the snipers, and very little cover that would be more than an inconvenience to even a basic weapon. And in the middle of the park stood the armored Asari assassin and the oddly small Force presence, another Asari. Though that one was outfitted very similarly to what Samara wore. Another Justicar? Neither side said anything as Revan stalked over the open ground, unignited sabers in her hand but ready to bust to life at the slightest sign, until the 3 of them were separated by only a few feet. After all the effort to lure her here, Revan was fully expecting one of them to be at least a little talkative, and she wasn't disappointed. Once he got close enough, the Justicar spoke up, "I think that's far enough, Sith. I'm afraid this will be the site of your death, But as a final mercy I will give you the opportunity to reflect on your sins and beg the goddess for mercy. Revan was getting flashbacks to some of the more fanatical Jedi she dealt with from time to time. And what sins would those be, Asari? I've acted against no one but the collectors, and if you are an agent of theirs, you are late to act. Do not try to hide it. The very title Sith reveals your crimes against the light of the goddess. You are the corruption waiting in the dark and unknown places. And it is the sacred duty of my order to see you destroyed. Revan tilted her head curiously. You would judge me purely by a name? I've encountered other species who have tales referencing the Sith, yet none of them have decided to hunt me down because of it. A bit of a lie, considering the only people in a position to do so were members of either Cerberus or the Normandy's crew. For all Revan knew, there were fanatical orders from other races bent on hunting her down after she named herself Sith Empress of both the Geth and Quarians. Even if she hadn't made any moves to broadcast that, the news had surely leaked by now. But the Asari shook her head. Wordplay won't save you. Unlike the other more ignorant races, our order was blessed by the direct teachings of a saint. A being sent by the goddess herself to enlighten us of the teachings of the noble pious D. And through the teachings they passed down, we know there can be no reconciliation with the monsters of the Sith. You clearly have no intention of repenting, so I will not waste time. Sith Revan, you have been judged by the Justicars and the Jedi Order of Athom's Blades. The sentence is death. May the goddess be merciful on your wretched soul. The fanatic finished, reaching behind her back. A bright blue blade ignited with an intimately familiar snap hiss, and then Revan was locked in a 5-on-1 battle for her life.